Private Lender Podcast, Episode 3.
Private lending is predicated based on the asset. The whole thing we're doing here is the asset has to pass with flying colors all by itself with plenty of equity, and that's kind of what holds the whole thing up.
This is the Private Lender Podcast, the show that shares practical advice and know-how for new and seasoned lenders, from private mortgages on single-family houses to joint ventures on commercial projects and beyond. Discover details about investment vehicles that you won't find at your local bank or online broker. Listen and learn from private lenders and real estate investors, as well as from professionals and entrepreneurs, as they share the details, strategies, and the insight that allows for successful and prosperous lending. Now, get ready to increase your ROI. Here's your host, Keith Baker.
Welcome to another episode of the Private Lender Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Baker, and I'm honored that you are sharing your most precious commodity with me today, and that is your time for this episode number 3. I promise you that I will do my best to make sure that you get your money's worth. Little joke, not funny. Today I have the honor of interviewing real estate investor and private lender Chris Funk. At a relatively young age, Chris became a well-respected investor in the Houston area by wholesaling, flipping, and owner financing properties. Chris is a frequent speaker and panelist at several real estate investing associations in Houston. And during his interview, Chris shares a lot of valuable insight and information into the world of private lending. Both lenders and borrowers, I believe, really have a lot to gain from his experience and by listening to what Chris has to offer on this episode. But before we get into the interview with Chris, first I'd like to thank our sponsor. The Private Lender Podcast is proudly sponsored by Bell Station, which is located in the heart of Midtown Houston. Bell Station offers a modern bar environment with a southern charm. Whether you're a sports enthusiast, a beer nerd, wine lover, or just a social butterfly, Bell Station has got you covered. You can visit Bell Station at 207 Gray Street, Houston, in the 77002, or visit them on the web at bellstationhtx.com. That's BELLE station htx.com. And now, back to the show. So first off, I'd like to say that I bungled another interview and completely forgot my ideas and questions, and that's because I know Chris fairly well. In fact, he's the first investor to whom I ever loaned money, and I was very impressed with him as an investor as an individual. He handles his business as just that, a business, and he's blunt, honest, straight up with everyone he deals with, and he's also a lot of fun to be around, and he loves talking about real estate. And that makes him a perfect guest here on the Private Lender Podcast. My interview with Chris lasted well over 90 minutes, and because of the long duration, I've decided to split this interview up into 2 shows. So let's dive right into the first part of the interview with Chris Funk. Joining us today is Chris Funk. We are honored to have him. He's a 36-year-old real estate investor from Houston, Texas, who dropped out of college at the age of 23. So I'm thinking, I guess 4 or 5 years was too much for you?
Yeah, I can handle it, man. It was all this, the books and studying and all this kind of stuff that just wasn't my bag. So I finally got out, luckily.
Hey, that's okay. It took me 8 years to get all the way through. So the fact that you bailed out early on, realizing it wasn't for you, is you're ahead of the game.
I think I ran out of money too. I think that played part of a role. So that was
that
catalyst.
That helps.
Yeah, I think it was tuition's how much? And I don't have that. Okay, so I guess I'm done here. Yeah.
So at 23, you quit school and you go to work construction, renovating homes and remodeling.
Yeah.
For a lot of investors and landlords, and you had the goal of learning the process inside and out so that you could own your own real estate. So if you can, take us into when real estate, why real estate? What was your aha moment? Like, I want to do this.
Yeah. Okay. So, the whole thing was by design. I hit the ground pretty soft. I came home from school. My parents were like, hey, come on home and we'll, you figure out where you're going to work and we'll get you set up or whatever. So I had a place to come home to and everything. It wasn't a big deal. And it was really the perfect environment for a young person to start their own company. When you got kids and you got a 9-to-5 and bills and stuff, it's a lot harder to just take off and say, I'm going to, spread my wings and do this thing over here. So I come home and I found a job. I think, one of my parents' friends had a construction company or something. And I started working for them doing as a helper, just general labor, stuff like that. And it's like, okay, got income coming in. Okay, so that's covered. I can pay insurance for my car. Like, we got the basics going on. And, and then I started to talk to my dad about life and, what I was going to do. And he's a real estate appraiser. My mom used to own her own real estate appraising company. My dad owns his own real estate appraising company. So I come from two business owners and entrepreneurs and real estate appraisers. So kind of had a leg up in that arena.
That's a great pedigree.
Yeah, it was super, and I kind of always danced around the world of real estate, either, working, doing a David Weekley Homes internship when I was in college, or working at Home Depot, or, every job I had seemed like kind of connected up to real estate in some way. And so I remember reading this book when I was a lot younger, and it was the pamphlet before Rich Dad, Poor Dad came out. It was like this little kind of, trifold thing stapled together. Maybe it was 30 pages or something. And I remember seeing that at my dad's office. I'm like, hey, do you have that little pamphlet? And he goes, yeah, I think I still got that somewhere, because I was intrigued by it. At a young age, I read this little pamphlet by Robert Kiyosaki. And so I Googled it. I was like, oh, he's got a book now. Great. I read it. I was like, Dad, this is what I want to do. I want to invest in real estate. This seems like it just makes the most sense. You can flip for income. You can hold for long-term wealth. Everything goes up in value. Like, you can borrow all the money. This seems like something that if I can master this, I'll kind of be set for life. I won't have to learn a new, switch jobs and try something new. So what attracted me was the idea that if I could learn this one thing, I'd kind of be set up. I'd have a profession for the rest of my life, and something that would gain financial momentum the longer I did it. Because the thing that scared me the most was retiring and, like wondering how my savings is going to do. Like, that's so linear. You're going to reduce your income to put it in savings, and then you're going to put it in the stock and see if it goes up or down, and maybe it does or doesn't, or maybe the whole thing crashes right before you retire and you're broke and you live under a bridge. Like, that doesn't sound good, So I was very intrigued by the design of the real estate investing system, and how you could flip for money today and invest for money tomorrow, and even the flips for tomorrow would give you money for today. So that pretty much made up my mind, and from that point I just started going to all the, gathering, kind of soaking up as much info as I could, and at that point I was doing a little remodeling work, and I met my first and last boss at the Real Estate Investment Club, and he did a lot of renovation. He owned a company that did jobs exclusively for investors, and so we fixed up homes for flippers and landlords and all different types of investors. And he approached me and said, this is what we're going to do. And he said, here's what I'll pay you. And it's about the same that I was making, I think, at the construction job. And so I said, sure, that sounds great. In fact, I want to be an investor someday. And I said, and just to be totally honest with you, because I've always been that kind of upfront, brutally honest guy, I was like, I'm probably going to leave here and quit and start investing. And I'm probably going to do that as soon as possible. And he said, well, I appreciate the heads up. If you will give me your word that you'll stay here for a year, then I'll train you up and, get a year out of you, and then you can leave and whatever. So,
nice. That's like a paid mentorship right there, internship all rolled into one.
It really was. And he was a brilliant, I guess, a remodeler. This guy had a mechanical mind, and he understood the home building process and the renovating process, which is almost the same, very similar, in an amazing way. I mean, had a great grasp of it. So under his tutelage, I really got my hands dirty. And, I think the very first house we had, he walked in, I showed up, I met him there. And next thing you know, this big fat redneck walks in with no shirt on and a pistol. And I'm like, oh, is this guy Oh, that's my boss. Yeah, that's right. The house is burned down, so it's like, picture me standing in a house that's halfway burned down. This guy's got his button-up shirt opened and his, gun in his shirt flapping in the wind. And I'm like, oh, here we are. We're in Texas, and, and then Chewy comes in,
hell yeah.
and, this little Hispanic dude that's like 4 feet tall, and he comes in and they start, jibber jabbering back and forth, and the rest was history. So I learned, I think the very first rehab we did was a burnout, and I got to see the process of, here's what you do first, second, third, here's how to tell a good crew. Every little nuance of the construction business, I was just thrown into it, and I loved it because I've always been fascinated with the construction side of real estate. I still am. So I worked for the guy for a year.
Exactly a year, or did you give him a little more time, or were you ready to, at that 300 days, 366, were you out the door?
He fired me on day 365.
Wow.
We were both kind of, stern-minded, or whatever you want to call it. We had a disagreement about some time off or something. And it was coming up on my 1 year. And he said, well, you know what? I'll just do this. Rather than go back and forth, how about this? You're fired.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. I was thinking about maybe another 6 months. And he's like, nope, you're done. And
wow.
At that point, I'd done a big wholesale deal, a couple of weeks before that. And so I was like, well, I got a few bucks in my pocket. I guess I'm out of the airplane now and time to pull the parachute, see what happens.
Nice.
So I kind of did that. I just went for it. And
so he burned the boats for you, pushed you out of the plane, and
right.
Here you go. Well, he did you a huge favor.
He did. And I'm still friends with the guy today. Sean Sherry, the Dependable Renovators, great guy. And I owe a lot of my success to what I learned working for Sean.
Sean Sherry, he owes me some money for that plug.
That's right.
But continue, please.
Yeah. So the rest is history. That's kind of how I got into it. My parents, like I said, both kind of exposed me to the fundamentals of real estate appraisal at a pretty early age. Then I went to all the clubs in town, the local real estate groups, and worked for Sean for a year. And after that, I was like, kind of found my place as a wholesaler, and just started hitting it hard and doing as many deals as I could do.
Cool. If we could, I'd like to drill down a little bit on you mentioned the appraisal background and that process, and for someone who obviously this podcast is going to be geared for people who already have some type of knowledge of real estate. But let's say I just left. It's Houston. We just got downsized from oil and gas, and now I've got this 401k I don't know what to do with. I'm thinking about doing a little private lending, but I'm scared because I know at my house I paid for it because I live in it. But walking into a property first time, how could somebody? It's not going to happen overnight, but how can somebody begin to start analyzing that? I mean, there's books out there, yeah, but like from you coming from your perspective with the pedigree that you have, and knowing how direct, or knowing how to get to an a value very quickly. Someone who's completely wet behind the ears, green, what would you start having them do to start that process of learning the appraisal, learning how to evaluate a property's condition?
Oh, sure. So, the thing that kind of helped me was the general idea of appraisal. They didn't teach me like as a kid, like how, to adjust comps or anything. What they did was they said, look, here's the big picture. Your friend has an apple, right? And your other friends have apples, all right? And you're basically just trying to figure out how similar is this apple to these others. Well, Johnny's apple's a little bit bigger. Sally's apple has a dent in the side, and you're all just kind of making adjustments for that and looking back at your buddy's apple and trying to figure out how does it compare, So I knew the general idea. And for someone new, that's all you're really doing is you're just looking at your house. You're comparing it to the next most similar house that you can find. And then you're trying to come to a value based on that. So, my dad always told me growing up, the best comp is the one on the same street,
Yeah, absolutely.
Comparable sale is a home that's sold within the last 6 months that's in the same neighborhood and within a half a mile of the one you're comparing it to. In the best case scenario, it's going to be similar in size, square footage, bedroom and bathroom configuration. You say plus or minus 10%, usually kind of a good figure to use. If you got a 3-bedroom, you're looking for other 3 bedrooms. If you got a 2-bathroom, looking for other 2 bathrooms. If it's 2-story, look for 2-story. Things like that. So you're basically looking through the multiple listing service of realtors who have sold homes in that neighborhood and looking for similarities. And you're going to use the closest homes to the one you're trying to get the value for to determine that. So you'll find 3 homes, typically 3 to 5 homes that are as close as possible to the one that you're trying to get the value for. And then as an appraiser, they make adjustments based on these certain factors that make it different. So if it's a little bit bigger, they have a mathematical adjustment that they will make. A lot of times it's a percentage. So they'll say, well, this one's 10% larger, so I'm going to make a 10% adjustment for this. And it's really that simple. You're basically just doing like, kind, and comparing homes to other homes. And it's pretty easy in neighborhoods that have activity. So if you're in the Heights in Houston, Texas, you're going to find probably several comps on the same street. You're definitely going to find a whole bunch within a half a mile radius. And so it's usually pretty easy. Then you just have to filter down because you might have too many to look at. You pull your search and it's with that criteria, what if 60, 70 results? That's too many to really make a conclusion. So you kind of filter down and tighten up on your search until you get a smaller number of variables. And then you just kind of come to a value. So nowadays I just kind of, I do that. I try to get it down to less than 10 comps. One of my major rules is not to cross a major street.
That's a good rule.
Yeah, you can have a neighborhood sometimes that overlaps a large street, and it's you're pulling your comps, so you're within a half a mile radius, and you're in the same neighborhood. But the reality is that on one side of the street, you have a bayou, maybe that backs up to some of these homes, or you'll have that part of the neighborhood basically butts up to a less desirable neighborhood and it has a lot of through streets. Well, people are not going to want to live there as much as they're going to want to live on the side where it's all the good neighborhood, so it's kind of think of it as if you were going to live there yourself, and I always tell people that, like, drive the neighborhood, look at it. Does it feel like something you'd want to buy? Is it a place you'd want to live? If you see a huge power line, I've had people ask me this, well, it has a huge power line in the backyard. Like, it's so big you can actually hear the power line buzzing and it's right in the backyard. Is that going to affect the value? Well, you just brought it up. So it's concerning you. You think it would concern others? Of course it would. Is that going to affect their? Yeah, absolutely. Would you want your kids playing back there and the thing's buzzing and the 40,000 volts of power? Yeah, it's going to affect the value. Common sense,
That's great. Not to mention the cancer threat, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Allegedly, there's no, I have no proof of that, but let's face it, like you said, common sense.
Yeah, two things being equal, you're going to take the one that doesn't have that potential risk, and
absolutely.
If that's the only one, you're going to want a discount for it. So,
well, that's why this ties so well into private lending, because it is. I mean, at the end of the day, the job of the private lender is to mitigate his or her risk.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great example of how you look at it, not only from an investor, whether it be wholesaling or landlording or whatever, but just coming at it. I think it's a great lesson that lenders can learn as well, especially people who are trying to get into it. Just, I've always said, just start walking properties.
Mm-hmm.
Just go look. When you go to your friend's house for the cocktail party, just go back there. If I was going to buy this,
mm-hmm.
what would be my concerns?
Mm-hmm.
And start to encompass that, because just like anything, no one's going to learn something overnight, but if you start little by little, the 1,000-mile journey starts with one step, and you just keep doing those steps, and it comes a little more natural each
Mm-hmm.
time, and more importantly, build confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to. You talked about fine tuning. You start off with like 60 comps. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square feet, 8,000 square foot lot. When you fine tune those comps? How are you doing that? Are you looking for amenities, furnishings, the details of, is it granite? Is it crown molding? What kind of walk us through how you fine tune your comps to get to a good sample size?
Okay, yeah, sure. So as you get down to, let's say you get down to 15, and you're pulling it. You say you start with 30, you get down to 15. You're getting pretty close in physical location. They're all now within a couple blocks. You're getting down to where they're all 3-bedroom, and you still have really too many to compare. So the next thing that I'm looking for is condition. And so I will usually go, depending on how your MLS is set up, I have a thing where I can just click on the photo and it'll just do like a quick view of just the photos, because I really don't want to look at all the pages and click back on my browser. I just want to quickly look at the front of the home and scan through a couple of the interior photos and see how that compares to my house. And if you really want to dig deep into it, I'm usually going to run comps in 3 different ways. I want to know, what's the house worth as it sits? So if I'm buying a junker, or if I'm a private lender lending on a junker, I'm running comps to see, have any other junkers sold on the MLS that are very similar to mine, because that gives me my as is. It's kind of like Kelly Blue Book. You got your private party value, your trade-in value. I'm kind of looking for that trade-in value. Or that private party value rather. What would the general public, the individual, buy this for if it was listed for sale in a public environment like MLS? So I'm looking for that. I want to know, what's this thing worth as is? Second thing I'm looking for is, where's its potential going? What's the after repaired value? So if it's worth 80 and another one down 2 streets over that was all kind of screwed up, foreclosure or something, sold for 80, I feel pretty comfortable buying it for 70, because I know that worst case scenario, I could turn right around, list the property, and probably bail out without having to come up with any cash, maybe even turn a profit. So if that looks good, we've passed the first test. The second thing I'm looking for is, what would that house sell for if it was fixed up? So I'm looking at the same configuration. I'm scanning the photos, and I'm looking for the one that's been all redone by an investor. So you're going to find, usually pretty quickly, you're going to find one that's been rehabbed. Depending on the neighborhood, sometimes you won't. If you find a rehabbed one, let's say that's using those same numbers. Let's say that rehabbed one sold for $150. Now you pass the second check, because I can sell it for almost twice what I'm paying for now, or over twice what I'm paying for it now, if I fix it up. And if I can fix it up for less than 80 grand, I'm going to turn a huge profit. So if I'm going to buy it for 70 and put 30 in it, and it can sell for 150, then we've passed 2 checks. It's worth more than what I'm paying for it right now as is. It's got plenty of upside potential to rehab it and make a profit. And then the third thing I'm looking for is the rental comps. But before we go to rental comps, let me talk about the as-is comps. So you got really 3 kinds. You got torn up houses, you got rehabbed houses, and then you got mom's house that, looks like mom's house. Grandma's house, I call it. Grandma's house, mom's house.
Probably smells like it too.
Right. There's probably nothing wrong with grandma's house, but it's got orange curtains. It's got green carpeting,
Shag.
Yeah. The wiring, the plumbing, the windows, the doors, it's all from 1963. But it's maintained, so you got those as-is comps, and you'll see the difference real quick when you start flipping through MLS. You go, oh man, I really like that one. I'd live there. And you got the one you're like, well, there's nothing wrong with it, but you don't get too excited. Those are your as-is comps. So I'm kind of looking at those two, and you kind of just have to use your judgment. Sometimes you won't find any junker comps. You'll only find grandma's house comps. Sometimes you won't find any rehab comps. You'll only find junker. So just be aware that there's really 3 different kinds of comps. The junkers, the as-is, and then the rehab ones. So I'm kind of looking at all 3 of those to paint a picture. It also helps to know when you're selling the home. if they're all junker comps out there and you're going to be the only rehab comp, you may want to double check on your, neighborhood and see if that's really the place you want to be doing a rehab. Vice versa. If you're going to try to just buy this thing and resell it without fixing it up, and all the comps out there are rehab comps, you may or may not have a market for that type of property out there. But typically you do. Typically it's the other way around. If there's rehab comps out there, you can definitely sell it as is, because a lot of rehabbers are going to want that deal. But on the flip side of the coin, if nobody's really rehabbing out there, they're all junkers, you might have a hard time finding a qualified a buyer on the back end once it's rehabbed. So I look at those three, and then I look at rental. Rental kind of rounds out the whole thing, and rental is my parachute. That's what I'm going to do if I can't sell it.
Can I stop you right there before we get into rental? Because I hate to interrupt you, but I'm going to forget if I don't.
Oh yeah, please do.
MLS.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have agent access?
Well, yeah. Since both my parents are appraisers, we just share information. So that's how I gain access to MLS.
So right out of the gate, you're juicing. You're going to Lance Armstrong,
basically
everybody there. Okay. I'm not. Hey, well, you're not running the Tour de France, so that's okay. Well, at least not yet. Anyway.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk to. I myself have curried favor with certain people that have allowed me access in my lending career, but it's not absolute. It is the gold standard, I would say. Mm-hmm. The multiple MLS for sure, but I've also lent without using it because I didn't have out of county, for example, on the east side of the state. I've lent over there, and I said no early on because I didn't have any access, and I didn't know any realtors who could give me a quick comparative comp analysis.
Mm-hmm.
For someone who doesn't have MLS access, I mean, someone who doesn't have the access,
right?
How would you, how could you get? What advice could you give them to have a reasonable understanding of those comps? Maybe not to the dime.
Yeah.
But let's say if it's 72,000 versus 73,000, there's enough margin there that shouldn't make or break a loan.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing is private lending is predicated based on the asset. The whole thing we're doing here is the asset has to pass with flying colors all by itself with plenty of equity, and that's kind of what holds the whole thing up, right? So I tell people, if you need, I've said this for years, if you need a calculator, it's not a deal. If you're trying to figure out what percentage of value, no. But if I tell you, hey man, this looks like everything around here is going for 150 and this thing's 70, yeah, I can tell you right now without even thinking about it, that sounds good. Now I'm going to want to know the repairs, but generally I'm like, yeah, that looks good. So one thing Zillow does do now is they show recent solds. There is a tab, there's a box you can check to say include recent solds. And because of some of the regulations with the MLS, they will a lot of times give you a range. And MLS actually does this now too. MLS will give you a range of solds. So it'll say this house sold on or before January 1st through January 31st this year, and it sold between 115 and 125.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. A lot of times you can just take that range, take the mean of those two numbers, whatever, 120, and just use that. And that's getting you real close. And if you do that with 3 or 4 comps, you've got a pretty close number, and it may actually be really, really accurate when you put that side by side. Because I can do that, not logged in, and then I can log in and I can see it. It's usually, I'll tell you, if it's 125 and 135, it's usually the mean.
Yeah, you're talking about looking at like MLS, for example, as a retail
consumer,
buyer,
yeah,
as a consumer coming off the street. I want to buy a house, not as an agent or a broker logging in.
Correct.
And just to clarify that. So okay, so Zillow has that option. Your local MLS should have that option as well elsewhere in the country.
Yes,
and
the Houston
I know
one does.
For sure, HAR does.
Yes,
absolutely,
they do.
Which is it's a nice little tool.
Yeah.
Especially a quick down and dirty assessment of something.
Yeah.
I've used that. I was not aware that Zillow was doing that, but I haven't been to Zillow in a while. So interesting.
Some Zillows will actually give you the exact sale price. It'll say recent solds, and then it'll tell you down to the penny what it sold for, and that's pretty cool too, to have that exact number right there on Zillow. Zillow is an app that I have on the homepage of my phone. It tells me where it is. It tells me a picture of the front of the house. It tells me the configuration according to whatever kind of appraisal data that's out there. And it's just kind of all there, all in one spot. So that's why I like Zillow. I probably wouldn't buy a house just based on a quick look at Zillow. But back to your question, I would always get a second opinion from a professional. And the easiest way to do that is to just call a few realtors that farm that area, and just look. You start with Zillow, you pull up your house, you look at the ones that recently sold around it. It's going to have the name and phone number of the realtor that sold it. So I'm going to call 2 or 3 realtors if I don't have access to MLS, and I'm going to say, hey guys, I'm looking at buying this or property or lending money on this property, and I'll here's what I would typically do. So let's say same numbers. We think it's worth 150 after repair. We think it's worth 80 as is, and we have a contract for 70. Or our borrower's going to buy it, and he's borrowing 70 to buy the house, whatever. I'm typically going to go in there and go, hey man, so I got this house that's all torn up for $100,000 in this neighborhood. What do you think? Do you think that's a good deal? Do you know what the comps are out there? And I'm going to have to sell it when I'm done, so I may need some help with that. What do you think? So I'm letting them know, hey, there's a possibility I could hire you to sell this for me, and here's what I'm doing in $100,000. And if they say $100,000 is a deal, you need to take it, that's a pretty good indication. And then a lot of times I'll tell them, so if I could buy it for 70, what would you say? And they'd say, well, I'd close yesterday if that's the price. If you get that from a couple realtors that work that area heavily, you're probably in good shape. You're looking at the Zillow, you're looking at those comps, you're getting the realtor. I don't know if they're allowed to run comps and just email them to you. I think they can. But I would ask for that. I would say, well, would you mind running me a few comps and sending them to me? And then when I get ready to sell this, I'll definitely consider you as an option to represent me in the sale of the home.
Well, you can absolutely do that, because I've done that without even selling, just on lending. Friends that are realtors, catch them on a slow day, give them an address, and bam, comparative market analysis is emailed in PDF within 3 to 5 minutes. That's true. They've got it so streamlined now where they can just click, and it'll shoot it right out. So if you catch him at his desk, he's not busy. Yeah, you might get some comps real fast. Okay, good to know. It is geared towards retail buyers. Sure. But so if you're, but you can tell them that you can if depending on your relationship, I think with the realtor. Obviously, if you just met someone at a RIA or some meetup, I probably wouldn't do that. But if you have build a relationship with them, and heck, throw them. If somebody needs a realtor, say, hey, no, I know this person. And then make sure they know that you were the one that referred them, so you can get some comps out of them. Which is nice. Yeah, absolutely. If they get business, they're likely to reciprocate that. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I like that. I also like that as well. What are you using to establish your comparables for rent rates? And let me just add one last thing, and I'll jump to rentals. Oh, sure. If someone's lending money for the very first time, order an appraisal. If they don't feel comfortable and they've run their comps and they really just want to have another layer of security, order an appraisal. $350, $450. Done. Yeah. Tell the borrower, say, hey, man, this is my first time doing it. I'm going to get an appraisal. Do you mind paying for that? Is that a big deal to you? And he's going to go, that's fine. It's way less than 9 points that the hard money guy's going to charge me. That's a great point because, as you know, I mean, real estate investors are notoriously cheap people. Yeah. We'll cut off the nose just to spite the face and save a $35 cleaning fee. Yeah. However, to me, that's always been a red flag in my lending. If somebody balks at an appraisal, and I'm not talking about a slam dunk deal. Okay, I'm talking about, if every house in a neighborhood is $150,000, this one needs $20,000, and it's on. They need 60 to buy it and 20 to fix it up. There's enough spread there. Sure. Okay, you might not need an appraisal, but if you have any question, the lender has any, especially a newbie lender, has any question about what the value is, whether it be as is or after repaired value, And if an investor is going to balk at a $300 or $400 appraisal because it's too expensive, then it's probably not a deal.
Yeah. Or that's probably not a borrower you want to do business with.
Exactly.
Because on both sides of the coin, what's $300 on a deal? That's nothing, right? And then on the other side of the coin, if you take $300 out of your yield on your private money, what does it take you from a 12 or a 10 down to a 11.8 or something? Like it really doesn't affect either side that much. So, and it's probably the number one mistake that both sides are making, both lender and investor, especially in this market, is they're paying too much. So maybe I would lean into that even more strongly than I originally did. Just get an appraisal. If you're worried about it, like you said, if there's plenty of equity, go for it. If there's a question, order an appraisal, order two. If you still have a question, order another one. Like it's not very much money, and it's a third party, and it's guaranteed you're going to see something on that appraisal you didn't see before, both sides. So, beat that horse to death, but that's an easy thing to do, and I know a good appraiser if you guys need one. So,
I bet you do.
But
cool.
In all honesty, my mom's retired, my dad's semi-retired. So, and my dad doesn't even really want to do residential anymore. So if you got a commercial, you might call him, but if it's a residential, he's probably not interested. Anyway, that being said, that's kind of how I feel about getting appraisal. It's just not going to hurt you.
Gotcha.
And say most borrowers I've borrowed, I've lent. I can just tell you as a borrower, I've had lenders lend too much. Now, I repaid them, I refied it out, it was fine. But I thought to myself, I wouldn't lend that much on this deal. I've had that happen before. And I know I'm going to do fine on it, so I'm not worried about it. But I can just tell you, I see my friends pay too much for properties all the time. I see lenders lend too much all the time. And that's the first and biggest mistake. And it's the one thing that if you get that right, almost nothing else can go wrong. There's very little else that can screw your deal up if you get that part right. So I lean heavily on loan to value. That kind of leads us right to the rest of what we're talking about. But
love that nugget.
Yeah, that's number one. Don't overborrow, don't overbuy, don't overlend, don't pay too much. That is your number one thing. And don't be afraid to ask a borrower to bring money to the table to make up the difference. If you're comfortable at
Skin
70,
in the game.
and he's wanting to buy it at 90, don't turn him down. And I see that happen a lot. I'm like, don't just turn the guy down. Just tell him, say, hey, man, based on this deal, I'll lend you $70,000. Anything above and beyond that, just bring it to the closing and we'll get the deal done.
That's perfect. Now, bring the money to the table. Let's get the deal done.
Yeah, and just tell him that. Say, here's how much I feel comfortable lending on the deal, and then move forward. So anyway, without diving too much into that, the rental comps are kind of like I said before. That's my bailout. That's how. If I can't sell this flip, this is assuming that I'm trying to flip the house. If I can't sell it, my next option is to rent it out. That is also the lender's option. If the deal goes bad, he has to take it back. Most lenders I know keep them as rentals. Some guys are super active, and they'll just, jump right into the investor's shoes and hire a contractor, finish the job, put it on the market, and get it flipped. But most private lenders and hard money lenders that I know, if they like the area at all, they're just going to stick a for rent sign, get that thing moved along, and off they go. So that's kind of why I'm looking at those rental comps. I want to know what can I get as a return on this thing if I can't sell the property, Right. And that's really all I want to see with the rentals.
And where are you looking for these rental comps? What websites are you going to? MLS as well, or are there other third party websites that you go to?
Yeah, I use MLS pretty much exclusively for comps and rental comps because it's just centralized. For me, it's easy. You can get them on Zillow, pretty accurate on Zillow. There might be others, but I think MLS just makes it so easy because they're quantified. It's all in a list. How many days on market. That formats, it's real meaty. All the data's right there. So I think you can find them on other websites like Zillow, but Zillow and MLS are really the only two that I know that'll show you those rental comps.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to ask you the really obvious question now. That what's so attractive about private lenders and their money? Why use them as a real estate investor? There are a lot of charlatans out there, especially on Facebook. Send me $500 and I'll get you an $80,000 loan. But like for you, like what makes it so? I mean, I know you use a lot of private money. So what is it about private money that you like so much, and why you use it? Versus saying going and getting a huge business line of credit because you've been established long enough, and I think you have enough assets. You could.
I'll have one. I don't use it.
You don't use it. Okay, there
I have
you go.
one. I don't use it. I have a $1.8 million line of credit that never gets used. Yeah.
Okay. First question: why you're not using that 1.8? And second question: can we talk after this podcast?
Yeah. Well, okay. So let me give you the second part of that. It is a guidance line, meaning it's not a line.
Right.
Meaning you're personally approved to do this amount of business with our bank. However, we are going to nitpick every deal to death.
Right.
So that's why I don't use it. The reality is I'm going to go back to the lender that's flexible and easy. Those are the two things that I like with a private lender. He's easy to deal with, and he's flexible. Flexible in terms, mainly ARV, mainly percentage. As a guy who does multiple deals, I like a lender that I can shoot him a deal, he can check it out, get back to me in a day or so, and say, yeah, we can do that, Chris. And while I just told you, don't overlend. Now I'm going to tell you, if you want more business, lower your standards, essentially. And by lowering your standards, I mean be willing to lend a higher loan to value. And that's kind of stepping away from the beginner game and kind of stepping into a more intermediate or an advanced lender's shoes. And with an advanced lender, you're probably dealing with a more advanced borrower, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense. But that's what I like. I like a guy I can text him, hey man, here's an address and some pics. What do you think? Yeah, I want to buy it for 65. You think it's cool? And he'll text me back and go, yeah, it's 65. I like it. You want to close Friday? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay. I'm like, all right, same terms as last time. And he's like, yep, that'll work. I'm like, cool. I would say see you Friday, but I want to actually go to closing, so I won't see him there, and neither will he. So, cool, thanks, and then it's a done deal. I like to reduce the sales task of selling a lender on my deal down to a text, a clerical event. I like that as a business owner. Anytime I can speed things up, automate, or just make it a yes/no thing. That's super cool to me. And it also gives me confidence as an investor to know that when I'm bidding on a property out there, making an offer on a deal, I know the money's waiting. He said yes to the last 10 deals I brought him, the last 30 deals I brought him. Yeah, I've got the confidence to go out there and say, yeah, I'll close in a week. I'll close in 4 days when you want to do this, and outbid the other investors that are, can't compete with the terms that I'm offering. They need 3 weeks or, something like that. So
it's definitely a higher level of higher level of sophistication for lending and investing at that point. That I think you're seeing a lot of that in the market right now is, people who need deals are going 75, 80, whatever they can do, and putting it as a rental.
Right.
And I know some lenders who will chase along with that. They trust the investor. And they don't think they're going to get bit. For a new person lending, I'd say stay away from that. It's better to have no loan and 0.5% a year than to get into something that can really come to bite you in the ass. And I mean, you won't lose everything. I mean, there's always that potential, I guess, for the absolute worst case scenario. But you certainly don't want to take a ding when your first 5 loans out there. You'd like for them to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the biggest things is they're easy to work with, and they can close in a couple days. That's probably, I say that's number one. It's obviously not, because if that was number one, I'd be going with hard money lenders because they can always close in 3 or 4 days. That's not usually an issue. Some can't, some needs a little bit more time. But really, probably the biggest thing is that I'm not paying points with lenders. Very seldom am I paying points to private lenders. And so if people don't know what points are a percentage of the deal. You're basically giving a percentage of the deal as a fee to the lender for borrowing their money right up front. And, that can be anywhere from 1%, maybe up to 5, 6, 7, or potentially even higher depending on the situation. And that just gets really expensive really quick, So if you get 6 points on a $80,000 deal, that's $5,000 right there. Plus your closing costs, plus your doc prep, your appraisal. Hard money's going to, the way I look at it is if you're closing with hard money, figure $10,000.
Easy.
And that, I'm like, man, that's a chunk of change. That takes a borderline deal and kind of blows it out, and they a lot of times want skin in the game. So probably the real reason that I use private lending is my ability to get the deal no money out of pocket whatsoever. If I'm buying it for 70, that's the other thing is if I'm buying it for 70, I'm always asking for 75. I don't want to have to write a check at the closing, give it to the bookkeeper, and then she's like, okay, you've got how much in it? Okay, and then how much when you refi? Do you have to put more? Do you get anything back? It's just a lot of extra stuff. I would much rather have the lender put up all the money, get a check back at closing for the difference, $500 or $1,500, whatever the difference is between what I borrowed and the actual cost to close. And then secondly, probably is the fact that it's done quickly and it's easy and I don't have to fill paperwork out and all that kind of stuff. It's much easier to send a text or make a quick phone call than it is to go through a 9-page real estate application, All
right, I'm going to stop it right there. So make sure you tune in next week to hear the conclusion of Chris's interview on episode 4. And I'd like to take a moment to remind you that you can lend a lot more than money in this world. You can lend time, compassion, and patience. So please go out and make the world a little bit better place, at least in the part that you have the most influence in. This is Keith Baker signing off for now. I'll see you next week on the Private Lender Podcast.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Private Lender Podcast with your host, Keith Baker. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit privatelenderpodcast.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time.